Hello, my name is Chris Kimmel, and welcome to this first flash class for humanity in deep space. As you probably know, have begun to do a series of webinars. Actually, we've got 3 more scheduled for later this year, and one in September, October, November. And one of the other ideas that we had is to continue to help put out content and spur on the conversation is this idea of a flash class, which is a very, very short, brief discussion with one person. And the vast majority of it, after a 3 or 4 minute introduction and presentation, the rest is going to be all Q&A with the audience. So feel free at any point starting now to go ahead and send in your questions, and then we will go from there. Again, this is going to be a 20-minute experiment, so we'll see how it goes. Very pleased to have as our first presenter guest on this first flash class is Savannah Mandel. Savannah is a space anthropologist. And I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself, but she's been very involved in humanity and deep space from the very beginning, several years ago. She's currently working on her PhD and is part of our team now, is helping us do some work and research. So having said that, let me introduce Savannah, and I'll turn it over to Savannah. And again, send in your questions. Savannah.
Hi guys, I'm really excited to meet you. Thank you again, Chris, and all of our sponsors for hosting me. This is going to be a super quick flash class, so hold on and prepare yourself for the ride. But just first off, who am I? Like, where did I conduct my research? What research am I conducting now? What's a space anthropologist? So a space anthropologist is an anthropologist who researches space. Most anthropologists don't have a fancy label like space anthropologist. It was just something that came out of a dinner party that I attended, in all honesty. So my research, I do field work, which means I go to locations where humans here on Earth are studying space and things that are way out there or things that don't even exist yet. I did my fieldwork at Spaceport America, which a lot of you have seen has been in the news like crazy lately for a series of successful flights. Congrats to them. So I went out there, I studied how they perceive risk, how they perceive concepts like sacrifice for the greater good of humanity. And that's where I started. And now I'm kind of taking a different look, and I'm looking at social cohesion and isolation, and really exploring Antarctica or the Arctic as an analog site, as well as some other less obvious analog sites like prisons or oil rigs or places where people are just naturally isolated. So that's me. Now let's get a little bit into what space anthropology is for those of you who don't know. Before I tell you what space anthropology is, let's just do a quick revision on what anthropology is, because the first question I get from a lot of people is, are you digging up bones? And I'm not, because that's what archaeologists do. Archaeologists dig in the dirt. Physical anthropologists study the biology. They're like Bones on the TV show. Cultural anthropologists, that's what I am. I study culture. This is also called social anthropology sometimes. And then linguistics is the study of language. What's cool about being a cultural anthropologist is you can literally study anything at all, which is why I got into it when I was in college, because I was like, you can study anime, you can study bike riders, you can study romance, food, like dancing, like literally anything you can think of, you can study it. And that's why it's such an awesome field. And including like all the stuff I just mentioned, you can study space and you can study things that haven't even happened yet. That's the crazy part. I can study what a human colony on Mars might look like by examining how humans interact here on Earth. And then you sort of make hypotheses about what it might be like on other planets. We can even do things like use science fiction, actual science fiction books and literature as analogs, so to speak. In other words, you look at a movie like The Martian and you think to yourself, how realistic is this? You know, is this how a person stranded on Mars would behave? And you kind of flesh this out using theory and history. So before I continue, I think I want to just put these names on the board and say that I'm not the only space anthropologist. when I was in the DC area doing research as well, I started to get that question, oh, you must be the first one, but I'm not. There's a lot of anthropologists out there who study space. Some of the names in this list are people I've worked with, some I've barely talked to, and this isn't even including the historians, right? Because there's a ton of historians out there that research space. This is just the social scientists, the sociologists, the anthropologists, the STS scholars, and this does not either include psychologists, because there's a lot of psychologists who work in the space industry currently. And now since we have a little bit of time, I wanted to share to you like how I got into this field, which is that I was in undergrad. I wanted to research space, and because so little people research space, right? This is a small list. It's a lot of names, but it's a small list. We can triple it because each of these people have grad students, right? And I don't know all grad students. There's people who just came into my program I'm in who are researching space. There's new people popping up all the time. So let's just times this list by 3, but that's still only like 50 people, right? Well, that was the issue. When I was an undergrad, I went up to a professor and I was like, hey, like I'm thinking about going to grad school. I want to research space. And she just didn't know how it was possible. She was like, no, you can't do that. And it took me just like sheer luck of running into other space anthropologists while I was at UCL to finally realize like, hey, okay, this is possible. There is a way to do this. And this is how. So now we are, but it's a new field and it constantly requires reinvention and new methods and pushing past boundaries. And you really have to approach everything with flexibility, seeing that you will create new theories as well as incorporate old ones. So, I mentioned Virgin success, and the more that commercial spaceflight has successes, the more field sites we have as options, right? But if I had to do like one quick pitch, it would just be to what's missing here in this field of study is the value that's placed on social sciences in general. And that's what we need more of. We need the social sciences to be taken seriously, the qualitative sciences to be really harnessed for their value and what they can provide to the field of space sciences.
All right, great. Thanks, Savannah. So we've got questions coming in. I appreciate that. And again, feel free to, if the rest of this is all Q&A, so ask anything you want. One of the first questions that came in, Savannah, which is, I think it's kind of interesting, is given your current work and your experience, what kind of, as we look forward to habitats outpost on, we'll say, Mars, not necessarily the moon. I mean, the moon is going to be difficult, but it's 3 days away. But when we start talking about Mars in the deep space, what might, in your view, kind of what does your magic wand tell you right now from your experience, what those might look like? And let me split them up. First one, let's talk about just expeditions, which are different. I mean, those are going to be the toughest ones, and then we can get into longer term, more permanent outposts. But in terms of the first expeditions that 20, 25 people, I mean, 5 to 7 months there, et cetera. What's your sense on that?
Well, I think a lot of people start to forget when they think about Martian colonies that these are really going to be research settlements where people are there to work. You sort of see this voluntary displacement, people voluntarily giving up their life on Earth to go work in another place. And they're living in this zone, this planet, this place to work. They're under the guidelines of the people who are in charge of their research. And so it's really a community of scientists. And that's going to look completely different than an actual settlement where you have children of those scientists and children of their children, and you have people who don't want to be scientists being born on a colony, and then all of a sudden, like, what about the guy who just wants to be an acrobat, and so I think we are going to see some big difference between those really early colonies and then the later ones that have much larger populations. And some examples you can look at if you want to see this in the real world is you have small research settlements like Ny-Ålesund near Svalbard, where you have like a couple hundred people, they're all research scientists. And then you have Antarctica, where you're starting to get tourists. You have people who work in the cafeteria, you have people who are just mechanics. And it's less like everyone, like McMurdo Station, I think has a population of 1,000 in the summertime, right? So the dynamics change the more people you add and the longer the duration of the colony. Now, in terms of the actual, what things will look like in the transport there, in a tiny little spaceship or starship or whatever, or space station, again, you have really different dynamics. Think about the ISS, where you have people under constant observation. You again have people who are there to work and work long hours. You have extremely confined spaces, not a lot of privacy, not a lot of comfort. And I see those being a lot tenser atmospheres like we had in some of the analog sites here on Earth.
So do you think, what is your, in terms of the, exploration efforts historically, going back to the very, very early efforts, are there, do you see, of course, it's a lot of, there's certainly similarities there, but obviously we're talking about, going off the planet into a zero G environment. Do you see, what is your, you see with that, that difficulty, that added difficulty of going into a zero G in terms of exploration? We've never faced that before.
You mean, what's my opinion on that?
Well, just how different, looking at historically, people say, well, we can look historically at exploration, which is true, and there's a lot to learn from that. But there's another dynamic going on here. There's actually two dynamics. One is where these explorers are going into zero G, which, with 1G environment is, we've all evolved in a 1G environment, and then they're exiting nature. We're a part of nature.
Yeah.
What added difficult? I mean, I can imagine added difficulties that could add.
People are going to get sick of it. I mean, look at Scott Kelly is pretty honest in a lot of his interviews that towards the end of his stay on the ISS, like he was kind of miserable. And I think you have to be a special kind of person to really enjoy that long term. I think it's just going to be natural for us to miss gravity. And I think as well, it's so hard to maintain human health in a zero G habitat. I mean, I think that's going to be this biggest struggle, is it's going to probably feel like you're just sick and like not feeling good for a long duration. It's going to be like being pregnant for 9 months, right? Like I've never experienced that myself, but like, you're just kind of in this state of like miserableness, hoping you get to the end, and I feel like that's going to be a real true worry and affect people psychologically.
Yeah. So another question asked is, there's already countries staking claim to sections of the moon, et cetera. What do you think about these outposts on Mars? Are they likely to maintain their identity, culture connection to their present country, like European settlers? I mean, what do you see there?
I mean, if we are comparing this to European settlers and stuff like that, colonies that came into being 400 years ago have tremendously changed. I mean, just tremendously. Look at America in the last 300 years. We were originally like kind of like a colony, right? But I think we're going to start to see some island cultures popping up. I think a big part of it is probably going to be how well the space program is maintained over the years of the existence of a colony. And what I mean by that, and you sometimes see this in science fiction literature, is in the beginning, you might have a lot of communication between a Mars colony and an Earth colony, and you might have new people being sent over all the time. But what happens if perspectives on Earth change? So what happens if people like suddenly realize attention needs to be put on Earth, and they just can't put as much focus on this Mars colony that's probably hard to maintain, and expensive to maintain. Let's think of that for a minute. And I think if that relationship starts to shift, we're going to see major, just different culture arise. And I think, hopefully we have a diverse crew going to Mars, and I love it to see people bring elements of their own culture to that. And so we might see something very unique in the terms of the way culture is created on there. Again, I think things like surveillance are going to affect them though, and the way they're run, because they're going to be run like a business and like a scientific enterprise. That's very different than the way you run a house.
So another interesting question, what do you see as the role and importance and effect of human hope in deep space?
I think it's going to be a major factor. Hope is what drives people. I've always mentioned Aurora and Kim Stanley Robinson, but there you see a multi-generational star trip, making an excursion out to another planet. And by the third generation, the hope was gone because the third generation never wanted to be there in the first place. They're just were born into it. And so sustaining that hope was just so difficult, especially when things didn't work out on the planet. And you have to, I think again, it takes a very special person to be a colonist on another planet, because I think you need less hope and more adaptability, more just sort of like acceptance. Okay, this is happening to us. This did not turn out as planned. What's next? Like just moving forward, like always moving forward, not looking back. And I think that's going to be a kind of required personality trait.
So another question here, an interesting question. We've had over time changes in social structures and environments have changed. Social norms have been affected, such as an agricultural, society evolving into a hierarchy of personal wealth, et cetera. Do you have any initial thoughts on how the condition of deep space living might change the norms that the communities live by?
I mean, I think it's going to change the norms in probably ways that we can't even predict. I mean, look at, for example, I like to examine Arctic people as a kind of like very realistic analog of what it might be like to live on a snowy planet, or even somewhere like Mars. You have small communities and restrictive environments. But the thing is, it's like the first time I talked to one of my professors who was an expert in Arctic studies, and I was like, yeah, how do they deal with this harsh environment, these restrictions? He's like, well, first off, they don't consider it harsh and they don't consider it restrictions. Like the mindset's just completely different. And I think that is going to play a big role. I think people are going to just start to see their world differently and adjust to a new normal like we have with COVID, right? We've all kind of gotten used to some really weird things if you think about it, standing 6 feet apart, not leaving your house without a mask, and now it's second nature to us, and it's weirder to not do these things.
All right. How do you think the tools and techniques of anthropological research will adapt to the study of human communities in space?
That's a good question. Now I'm in the field of STS, which is science and technology studies. So instead of studying, we study the scientist, not the science, really. We study actual scientists. And I think that STS provides a lot of useful tools because people interacting with space typically are scientists or researchers or, entrepreneurs. I think that your methods are going to change depending on what your field site is, completely and totally. So I think if you're studying SpaceX, it's going to be different from Spaceport America. Spaceport America is an airport for spaceships. Their business model looks completely different than SpaceX, which was, started off as a startup essentially, and is, it's just you have to take a different look on it the same way you would with different types of business models. And then other ways, like Janet Bertici, she researched rovers, and she ended up looking at how the scientists themselves were interacting with the rovers and embodying the rovers while they were creating them. I think it's just flexibility. You do use traditional ethnographic methods, which means living with the people, deep play, in other words, acting like a local. So say if I didn't love space, I kind of have to go into the environment, recognizing that bias and putting myself in the shoes of other people. That all is still there, that traditional stuff. Interviewing techniques are the same pretty much. Then again, interviewing techniques with someone who's on Mars, that would be different because there's a 20-minute delay. So
one of the good question, interesting questions is you talk about Mars and the moon being, we talk about these being the next colony. Are there still mysteries about what's under the ice in Antarctica, for example, that can provide insights into the colonization of other planets?
Yeah, when I was in high school, I found this old book from the 60s and it was like 7 steps to conquering the universe. And the first step was, instead of conquering the universe, first we need to conquer our own oceans. And to me, there's so much unexplored here on Earth, and also planet Earth is in a lot of trouble, right? We have population issues, we have global warming issues. I would love to see more research done in the Arctic, more research done in the oceans. I would love to see colonies pop up in these places and learn how to harvest these harsh environments. Again, like the desert as well as another one, and establish those sort of colonies here first. It's also a lot less expensive than a very long trip to Mars. But yeah, there's so much to learn. And it's shocking sometimes how little we know about our own planet. And we're so desperate to move on to greener grass. So.
How much, one other question is how much, as we go forward here, things like water purification, waste solids management, they're both on the journey and on, again, on a planet like Mars, which is a 5 to 7 month trip. Those are going to be critical issues, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. All the technical stuff. I have no idea. I am not a tech person, and I just try to have faith and step back and know that that's advancing so fast. So I can't give you a timeline on that. I don't know much about it. I just know the social stuff, but I hope a lot of effort's being put into that.
Yeah, clearly weight and mass is going to be a critical factor going to space. And unlike going to the moon, which is 3 days away, we're talking about 5 to 7 months, probably even on an expedition. Wouldn't you say you're probably going to be on the planet at least a year, if not longer, before coming back? And then you got 5 to 7 months back. And because you can't take a lot of stuff with you, I think, what things like water purification, food, waste management, all those kinds of things are going to be, potential game changers. The another, we're just about out of time here. Interesting question here. It says, given that we've just seen during the pandemic that people don't like to live in isolation at home with their own family, how do you see this, transpiring and people adjusting to live in fairly, very small environments, things like food habits and other kinds of norms on a distant planet?
So I have talked about this a lot in other lectures, and that's kind of what I'm doing my dissertation on. From the research that we have from analog sites, it's going to go badly. I think it'll just take a lot of work. From what we've seen in analog sites, tension tends to always arise, especially in the longer term missions like biosphere. You should really check out the biographies of the people who were in the biosphere. It really gives you some insight into how food practices and things like that are going to change. I think it's hard, living with roommates, as much as you love them, even if they're your best friends, sometimes that makes it worse. It's not easy. You have to be, psychology is really going to come into play here. And I hope that there is like a team of 100 psychologists helping each person through this journey. I hope they choose really patient people. And I know we're almost out of time. For those of you who are asking me if I'd really want to go to space and stuff like that, I have a fear of planes. So I don't know if I'll make it into space. Would I live in a colony for months on end? Yeah. And I might do that for my dissertation research, go to Antarctica. That's kind of in the plan here. But the actual prospect of being in a spaceship makes me feel nauseous. Well,
I just saw where NASA is now recruiting people for a 1-year analog experience. So if you think you want to try that, you might go with it, or any others out there. So we're basically out of time. Interesting questions that came in. Somebody said that they didn't think 0G was a big obstacle, that we had technologies to overcome that. Somebody talking questions about radiation and protection and some of the things that are going to be there. And others talking about some of the other techniques that anthropologists might use and have to change before this by going to Mars. Let me just thank the sponsors so much for Humanity in Deep Space. You can see them on your panel: Space Tango, Kentucky Science Technology Corporation, National Stem Cell Foundation, Children's Center, Baird, Higher Orbits, Media Collaboratory, and PDA, Lighting and Sound, are some of the more prominent sponsors, and I want to appreciate that. Also, on your screen, you've got Savannah's website and her Twitter account. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with her, or you can send them to me at kkimmel, humanityanddeepspace.com. And always visit our website where we have articles posted, some by Savannah, others by other thinkers in this area on different aspects of deep space. And again, you can check that out at humanityanddeepspace.com. We're out of time for this first flash class. I would be very interested in any of you that have a minute to share with me at my email, kkimmel@humanityanddeepspace.com, your thoughts about this flash class. Did you find it interesting? Was it too long, too short? So that we can figure out if we want to continue to do these. So Savannah, thank you so much for your time. It's been always fascinating to talk with you. And we will talk with you and hopefully see many of you next time for our next webinar, which will be in September of 2021. And you'll be seeing a notice on that coming out within just a week or two. Thank you, Savannah.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out via email if your question didn't get answered. I will definitely respond.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.